Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is former trial lawyer, executive director of Friends Without a Border, and Glenview author, David Pritchard. David is the author of Feel the Rain. Welcome, David.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, yes. And your book title, Feel the Rain, the complexity and expansion of the consciousness. How did you come up with this title?
Well, you know, when you write a book, you have a working title when you start out, and then it changes. And I just stumbled on this wonderful quote that I thought was perfect because the book's about consciousness. And the quote was, some people feel the rain, others just get wet. And they don't really know who the author is. Some people say it was Bob Dylan. Some people say Bob Marley. But they think it was probably a country western singer years back that sang it. But I thought Feel the Rain, an introduction to the complexity and expansion of consciousness, ended up being the title.
Incredible extinction, isn't it? Because we all get wet.
Yeah, but some people don't feel the rain.
Oh, very interesting. How did you choose to write about such a deep and complex topic? I mean, it's not like the simplest topic to go for your first book.
Well, my mother says it's a curse that I have been so serious ever since I was even a little boy. I wanted to know, why are we here? Is there a God? What is the meaning of life? I've just always been that way, and
sounds like one of my sons. But
yeah,
go ahead.
And you can't really get anything more deep than what is the nature of consciousness.
Yes.
And so that's kind of why I went after it.
And who was your audience, or your intended audience initially, or?
Well, I actually wrote the book for myself, primarily. When I was a young lawyer, I was told by my first boss, when you put your name on something, it should be sterling on silver. And I knew I had published in medical journals and legal journals, and I knew that if I was going to publish something, I was going to do it right, I was going to do it seriously. And so that was one reason I wrote it. But I also know that although most people may not be interested in something as heavy as what is the nature of consciousness, there are enough people that are, particularly on the North Shore and in Glenview. They think about those types of things, and so I wrote it for them too.
Wow, yeah, so this is really, I think, especially in contrast to the fast pace of sound bites and social media, these questions are becoming more of on people's minds.
That's because people's consciousness is being raised.
Okay, so what, if anything, did you do to writing this book to make such a topic accessible, right? Because that's the, I think that's the problem with something
That's a good
so
question.
Heavy.
Well, I like to think that I have a skill of explaining things. I was a trial lawyer in the medical area, and I would have to explain complex medical problems to a jury, or even I'd have to explain the law to a judge, or explain it to an appellate court. So I like to think I'm pretty good at making something easier to understand. Also, I put the book into two separate sections. First section's entirely on the nature of consciousness, and the second section is individual practices for expanding your consciousness. But what really, I think, helps is that each chapter stands by itself. If you didn't understand, or you didn't quite get through, how the brain generates consciousness through different parts of the brain, that's okay, because each chapter stands alone. You can go on to the next chapter, then you can read about levels of consciousness or different techniques for raising your consciousness.
Well, the first section, I mean, just defining it, isn't that a colossal project by itself?
Oh, you're so right. People have been, ever since consciousness was first discussed, even before the great Greek philosophers, there has never been an agreement on what consciousness is. Scholars called this the hard problem. And when I was researching, I was really surprised to learn there was like over 40 different types of consciousness.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to explain this to people? But I found, it's a little reductionist, but I think it's true. You can understand it if you break it into 4 categories. Dualism, monism, Mysterianism, and way out there. Dualism is really what most people think of consciousness. They think that your consciousness is something separate from your body. Your brain is something separate. It's something that will live forever or will, and that's called dualism. And most people think that way. But the better thinking is monism, that the world is made out of the same stuff. And of course we know now that how consciousness is generated and that it's not something outside the human body. It's part of the material stuff that everything else is. Mysterianism is a group of theories that say, well, consciousness is so mysterious, we can't define it. It'd be like asking a really smart dog to calculate the square area of a triangle. And then the last one, there's just a lot of con people out there that just, they make up theories of consciousness and they sell their books and
Without doing the research. Right?
Yeah. But some of the really strange theories of consciousness, one of them called biocentrism. There's been 3 books written by a gentleman named Lanza. Which says that the Big Bang wasn't real, and that consciousness really creates the universe. And at first you kind of write it off as, oh, that's kind of crazy, but that gentleman he's got a Nobel Prize. He's so some of those theories are well worth thinking about. You don't want to be a flat earther and just write off things without having an open mind. But those are the 4 categories: dualism and monism and Mysterianism, and then way out there would be the last theory.
All right, so, okay, let me see if I grasp some of this. So is consciousness something tangible? I mean, it sounds like a monism, the second one, you mean it is something you can detect, like it is...
Yeah, it is a material thing.
Yes.
That's generated. But it's more like when you're looking at a computer screen and you're working, you don't realize all the stuff that's in the back that's making the picture or the calculation or the research show up on the screen. And the book explains how some of that is generated. Even though there's all these different theories of consciousness, what basically consciousness is what's your degree of awareness, not only of the world out there, but of your own inner world. What is your degree of awareness?
Yes.
And
that's...
we are shockingly not aware
Yeah,
of what
that-
we think, how we act.
I think that's a very good premise of where consciousnesses begin, right? We have to be first self-aware, I guess, and then, well, and so this comes to a question. When you mentioned the Greek philosophers and so forth, I read your bio. It seemed like you had a background in theology. Do you think that's very necessary background to tackle this topic, right?
That's part of my lifelong obsession with, I guess, the meaning of life. Yeah, I went to the seminary to be a priest when I was in high school. I got a master's degree in theology when I was much older. I went back to that. So yes, I like to learn, and so that's the path I followed there.
David, to answer this question on consciousness, to have a background in this, I feel like you can't discuss consciousness without some background in theology. And reading your bio, I saw that you had this incredible journey, before being a trial lawyer, that we studied in theology.
Yes, it's, I guess, part of my taking life so seriously. When I was in high school, I went away to the seminary to be a priest. that obviously didn't take. And then when I was quite a bit older, I went back and got a master's degree in theology. And so I do feel I have training in that aspect of it, but consciousness is also neuroscience and psychology and so many other things. And what I tried to do in the book, since I can't possibly be a master of all those things or even most of those things, I looked at this, what I called scholars and in all those different areas and tried to bring the best writings and the best thought into it. And then I also brought in mystics, people that are, I guess, scholars in their own right, mostly from the East, you know, and there's who've trained in things like meditation and their own way of consciousness raising. So I like to think the book brings in the best of the scholars and the best of the mystics, and so that people can read it and judge for themselves.
And so you mentioned the second half of your book is about the being more aware or the raising your consciousness. So what is something that readers can do to expand?
Great question. Expanding consciousness is really about changing your perspective, being able to look at things differently and not being filtered by your genetics or the way you were raised or by your culture. It's being able to really look at things honestly, and there's I have several techniques for doing that. By far, the number one technique is meditation. In fact, you could even argue it's a required technique because it allows you to stop, keep your crazy monkey brain from going all over the place, and just look at something with a fresh set of eyes. So there's quite a bit on meditation in there. But one of the interesting ones that I have in there that I'm kind of proud of is forgiveness. And the power you have of raising your consciousness by letting it go when you're angry at someone. And it's funny, I didn't put this in the book, but in thinking about what I was going to say today, something popped in my mind that I should have put in the book. Take Jesus Christ, whether you're Christian or not Christian. Two of the most important things he ever said had to do with forgiveness. His apostles asked him, "How do I pray?" And he told them the Our Father. And what is a big part of the Our Father? Forgive us, Father, and we will forgive other people. Secondly, he's dying on the cross, and what's the last thing he says? He turns to his Father and he says, "Forgive them, they know not what they do." And forgiveness is just simply a really powerful exercise, and I trace in that section of the book why it works and how you can make it work for you, hopefully.
Oh, incredible. I would say that the meditation part I expected you to mention, but not the second part about forgiveness. And many thoughts, or I guess Buddhism too, have considered the value of forgiveness. But I think I would say that your examples with Jesus is very personal, very unique about Christianity. Now, are there recognized levels of consciousness? When we talk about consciousness, I'm assuming that we're talking about being awake, right? What about, does this also cover the consciousness when you dream something incredibly real?
Yes, that's an aspect of consciousness when you're dreaming. But there are levels of consciousness, and I have a chapter on levels of consciousness, and it's really probably my favorite chapter in the book. There levels where you, as your consciousness expands, you go up a level. The first person to ever talk about levels of consciousness was Freud, and those were social, sexual levels, and they've been largely discredited by scholars since then. You probably remember from college Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. Many people are familiar. And that turns out to be very, very valid. That it starts with physical needs, and then safety needs, and then social needs, ego needs, and then enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it. But when you're starving, your consciousness is just food.
Right.
You know, I'll steal something. I'll kill for this.
Right.
And
If you're cold, you can't think of anything else.
exactly.
Yeah.
But scholars since then have looked much more carefully at levels, and they have shown that these same types of Maslowian type levels have occurred throughout history in all different cultures, in all different parts of the world, and so they are a valid thing that occurs even if people don't realize it. I go into some of the leading scholars on what they think about different levels of consciousness in one of the chapters.
Very interesting approach, and that's very practical too, because sometimes we don't think of consciousness in a very practical sense of definition. Let's see. Well, how hard is it to actually expand your consciousness?
Boy, these are great questions. It's kind of good news, bad news.
Okay.
The bad news is it's really hard. You'd think it would be easy, but it's really hard. You can only, most people, even when they're working at it, they go up one level, and going up two is just like unheard of. And there are scholars as to why this is so hard.
Yes.
And one of the reasons, big reasons, is we're busy. You know, you're a student, and then all of a sudden you got bills to pay, you got kids crying, you got all these, you got to go to work, you got all these things, and you don't have time to do these practices. And then when you're older, you maybe do again, but you lose these big blocks of time. So it can be very hard. The good news is it can be done. And what I suggest in the book is that, you know, if you want, you got to start by having some understanding of what consciousness is. More importantly, what is limiting you? Why are you being held back? Why aren't you seeing things correctly? And that's what the first part of the book is about. And then you go to the second part, and you can use the different practices, and
so the first,
good luck.
Yeah, so the first part is more like a hardware, and then the second part is how do you use it. But I do think most of the time we think of people who have expanded their consciousness are the monks or someone who, you know, doesn't have children and everything else to worry about. They have the luxury to be expanding their consciousness.
That's a great insight, and it's absolutely true. They have the luxury of being able to expand their consciousness.
But your book hopefully makes it more possible for the rest of us.
Well, I hope it helps a little bit, but
Yeah.
it's kind of up to each person.
So how long did it take? You mentioned 4 years. So, but the incubation sometimes is
Well,
much longer.
thankfully to COVID, it got done, which I think maybe a lot of amateur authors like me got some writing done during COVID. Yeah, on and off for a couple of years. You know, you're busy and you do a part of it. Luckily, each chapter stands alone, so you could work on one chapter, put it down, work on another. And in COVID, I worked every day for a couple of years and got it knocked out.
I see. And you just, did you already have chapters? I mean, how did you organize that? Or did you take out chapters?
Yeah, you know, you interview so many authors, you probably know this already. You just change your mind all the time. It's not like writing a novel. Mine's nonfiction.
True.
So, you know, you put a topic in, you take a topic out. And one of the topics I didn't put in was a practice of gratitude, which is an incredibly good practice for raising your consciousness. But I didn't have room, so the book was getting too long. So that's not in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, it changes all the time.
But it's an introduction. It's an introduction to the conversation of it for people to start looking for it.
Yes. I did make one mistake in writing the book. I made the first chapter a little too dense, and some people give up on it, and if they would just move to the other ones, if I had to redo it, I would have made it a little easier in the first chapter.
Well,
But, first book.
yes, and this is a good warning, I guess, for your readers. And so, speaking of your readers, how has this book been received? What is what are the feedback you have received?
The feedback has been two complete opposites.
Okay.
I have good friends that say, "Oh man, I didn't understand it. I couldn't get through any of that book. I tried. I like you. I tried to read it. I bought your book, but I couldn't get through with it." And then I get these incredible responses. You can get the book on Amazon.com. And if you go to Amazon, they have reviews. I'm humbled. Well, I'm more humbled by people telling me they didn't like the book. But you read these reviews, and they're like, wow. Every one of them was whatever the maximum stars was. And apparently, if you're interested in the topic, it's a really good book for you.
Yes.
If you're not interested in doing the work, it's not a good book for you. I got a random, wild email from the former premier of Bermuda, who had somehow read the book and wrote me this lovely email saying,
fascinating,
nice things. So it's been a mix.
So it's incredible when you write a book, the kind of connection you're making with the world out there, right?
You do make connections with some people, and some people you don't.
Well, some people you will never meet, let's say, without the book. That would be,
excellent. That's a good point.
Yeah, excellent reward, I would think. And do you plan to write another one?
I am working on a book right now. It's about the nature of God. I mean, from one hard topic to another.
Yeah.
And working title is The Reality of Faith. One of the chapters I'm excited about, is because I'm a lawyer, I'm used to looking at evidence.
Yes.
I was also a medical ethicist at Children's for a while.
Yeah.
And, you deal with hard problems, and you really got to know the facts. So in talking about God, one of the things I start out, well, what do you mean by God? Because if you mean a man with a white beard sitting on a cloud, then hopefully we're all atheists. And but if you
changed a lot,
right?
So,
but then you get into spirituality and all sorts of things. So I try and at least start it from a logical point of view. But that book's a good 2 years off.
Oh yeah, but perhaps the beginning of that book has to have that Maslowian connection as well. Like as life is getting better for people, how do they see God? Because I think it's very different since, let's say, my grandmother, or my grandparents who live with very different conditions. So
that is a great idea. I'm stealing it.
You'll
find it in the book in 2 years.
You're very welcome to. I'm glad I could do something to contribute to your book writing. And David, what is your Glenview connection?
We moved to Glenview, my wife, Joan, and I, in 1980, right before we had our first child. I'm from Wilmette, so it's basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And we lived at two different addresses. We had 3 children. We raised them all here. They went to Glenbrook, and Joan was very active in the Glenview Theater Guild. She was a director of the musicals. Yeah. I was assistant scoutmaster of Troop 55.
Oh, yes.
I coached Park District soccer for years. We were taught CCD at OLPH. We were all in for Glenview.
Yeah.
And then when our kids were up and gone, we moved actually to a lake. We live on a lake in Indiana where my grandchildren are. So that's where I am now. But we're really appreciative of Glenview.
Yes, what a journey. You're very active, and I'm sure some of these places still reminds you of the time you spent here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here, David, and explaining the Feel the Rain.
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.